Hello there. Come in. Take the weight off. Welcome to Homemade Audiobooks, the coziest corner of YouTube, a nest where you can settle down, turn the lights low, shut your peepers, and listen in to my homemade narrations of some of my favourite ever tales. These will be slightly over-the-top readings, with silly voices, accents aplenty, and a whole myriad of sound effects, all intended to give you the most immersive experience possible. What's better than reading? Well, listening to someone read to you. If you're enjoying my creations, then head over to Patreon to support my efforts. It would mean ever so much. For now, though, let's head off to 1960s New York and the Gothic splendour of the Branford Building. It's time for Ira Levin's legendary horror yarn, Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby, written by Ira Levin, read by Homemade Audiobooks. Part 1, Chapter 2. Hutch, surprisingly, tried to talk them out of it, on the grounds that the Branford was a danger zone. When Rosemary had first come to New York in June of 1962, she had joined another Omaha girl and two girls from Atlanta in an apartment on Lower Lexington Avenue. Hutch lived next door, and though he declined to be the full-time father substitute the girls would have made of him, he had raised two daughters of his own, and that was quite enough, thank you. He was nonetheless on hand in emergencies, such as the night someone was on the fire escape, and the time Jean almost choked to death. His name was Edward Hutchins. He was English. He was 54. Under 3 different pen names, he wrote 3 different series of boys' adventure books. To Rosemary he gave another sort of emergency assistance. She was the youngest of 6 children, the other 5 of whom had married early and made homes close to their parents. Behind her in Omaha she had left an angry, suspicious father, a silent mother, and 4 resenting brothers and sisters. Only the next to the oldest, Brian, who had a drink problem, had said, "Go on, Rosie, do what you want to do," and had slipped her a plastic handbag with $85 in it. In New York, Rosemary felt guilty and selfish, and Hutch bucked her up with strong tea and talks about parents and children and one's duty to oneself. She asked him questions that had been unspeakable in Catholic High. He sent her to a night course in philosophy at NYU. "I'll make a duchess out of this Cockney flower girl yet," he said, and Rosemary had had wit enough to say, "Garn." Now, every month or so, Rosemary and Guy had dinner with Hutch, either in their apartment or, when it was his turn, in a restaurant. Guy found Hutch a bit boring, but always treated him cordially. His wife had been a cousin of Terence Rattigan, the playwright, and Rattigan and Hutch corresponded. Connections often proved crucial in the theatre, Guy knew, even connections at second hand. On the Thursday after they saw the apartment, Rosemary and Guy had dinner with Hutch at Klub's, a small German restaurant on 23rd Street. They had given his name to Mrs. Cortez on Tuesday afternoon as one of 3 references she had asked for, and he had already received and answered her letter of inquiry. "I was tempted to say that you were drug addicts or litterbugs," he said, "or something equally repellent to managers of apartment houses." They asked why. I don't know whether or not you know it," he said, buttering a roll, "but the Branford had rather an unpleasant reputation early in the century." He looked up, saw that they didn't know, and went on. He had a broad, shiny face, blue eyes that darted enthusiastically, and a few strands of wetted-down black hair combed crossways over his scalp. "Along with the Isadora Duncans and Theodore Dreisers," he said, "the Branford has housed a considerable number of less attractive personages. It's where the Trench sisters performed their little dietary experiments, and where Keith Kennedy held his parties. Adrian Marcato lived there too, and so did Pearl Ames." "Who were the Trench sisters?" Guy asked, and Rosemary asked, "Who is Adrian Marcato?" "The Trench sisters," Hutch said, were two proper Victorian ladies who were occasional cannibals. They cooked and ate several young children, including a niece. Lovely, Guy said. Hutch turned to Rosemary. Adrian Marcato practiced witchcraft, he said. He made quite a splash in the 1890s by announcing that he had succeeded in conjuring up the living Satan. He showed off a handful of hair and some claw parings, and apparently people believed him, enough of them at least to form a mob that attacked and nearly killed him in the Bramford lobby. You're joking, Rosemary said. I'm quite serious. A few years later the Keith Kennedy business began, and by the 20s the house was half empty. Guy said, I knew about Keith Kennedy and about Pearl Ames, but I didn't know Adrian Marcato lived there. And those sisters, Rosemary said with a shudder. It was only World War II and the housing shortage, Hutch said, that filled the place up again, and now it's acquired a bit of grand old apartment house prestige, but in the 20s it was called Black Bramford, and sensible people stayed away. The melon is for the lady, isn't it, Rosemary? The waiter placed their appetizers. Rosemary looked questioningly at Guy. He pursed his brow and gave a quick headshake. It's nothing. Don't let him scare you. The waiter left. Over the years, Hutch said, the Bramford has had far more than its share of ugly and unsavoury happenings, nor have all of them been in the distant past. In 1959, a dead infant was found wrapped in newspaper in the basement. Rosemary said, but awful things probably happen in every apartment now and then. Now and then, Hutch said. The point is, though, that at the Bramford awful things happen a good deal more frequently than now and then. There are less spectacular irregularities, too. There have been more suicides there, for instance, than in houses of comparable size and age. What's the answer, Hutch? Guy said, playing serious and concerned. There must be some kind of explanation. Hutch looked at him for a moment. I don't know, he said. Perhaps it's simply that the notoriety of a pair of trench sisters attracts an Adrian Marcato, and his notoriety attracts a Keith Kennedy, and eventually a house becomes a kind of a rallying place for people who are more prone than others to certain types of behaviour. Or perhaps there are things we don't know yet about magnetic fields or electrons or whatever, ways in which a place can quite literally be malign. I do know this, though, the Bramford is by no means unique. There was a house in London on Praed Street in which 5 separate brutal murders took place within 60 years. None of the 5 was in any way connected with any of the others. The murderers weren't related, nor were the victims, nor were all the murders committed for the same Moonstone or Maltese Falcon. Yet 5 separate brutal murders took place within 60 years. In a small house, with a shop on the street and an apartment overhead. It was demolished in 1954 for no especially pressing purpose, since as far as I know the plot was left empty. Rosemary worked a spoon in melon. Maybe there are good houses too, she said. Houses where people keep falling in love and getting married and having babies. And becoming stars, Guy said. Probably there are, Hutch said. Only one never hears of them. It's the stinkers that get the publicity. He smiled at Rosemary and Guy. I wish you two would look for a good house instead of the Bramford, he said. Rosemary's spoon of melon stopped halfway to her mouth. Are you honestly trying to talk us out of it? She asked. My dear girl, Hutch said, I had a perfectly good date with a charming woman this evening and broke it solely to see you and say my say. I am honestly trying to talk you out of it. Oh, Jesus, Hutch, Guy began. I am not saying, Hutch said, that you will walk into the Bramford and be hit on the head with a piano, or eaten by spinsters, or turned to stone. I am simply saying that the record is there and ought to be considered, along with the reasonable rent and the working fireplace. The house has a high incidence of unpleasant happenings. Why deliberately enter a danger zone? Go to the Dakota or the Osborne if you're dead set on 19th century splendour. The Dakota is co-op, Rosemary said, and the Osborne's going to be torn down. Aren't you exaggerating a little bit, Hutch? Guy said. Have there been any other unpleasant happenings in the past few years besides that baby in the basement? An elevator man was killed last winter, Hutch said, in a not at the dinner table kind of accident. I was at the library this afternoon with the Times Index and 3 hours of microfilm. Would you care to hear more? Rosemary looked at Guy. He put down his fork and wiped his mouth. It's silly, he said. All right, a lot of unpleasant things have happened there. That doesn't mean that more of them are going to happen. I don't see why the Bramford is any more of a danger zone than any other house in the city. You can flip a coin and get 5 heads in a row. That doesn't mean that the next 5 flips are going to be heads too. And it doesn't mean that the coin is any different from any other coin. It's coincidence, that's all. If there were really something wrong, Rosemary said, wouldn't it have been demolished like the house in London? The house in London, Hutch said, was owned by the family of the last chap murdered there. The Bramford is owned by the church next door. There you are, Guy said, lighting a cigarette. We've got divine protection. It hasn't been working, Hutch said. The waiter lifted away their plates. Rosemary said, I didn't know it was owned by a church. And Guy said, the whole city is, honey. Have you tried the Wyoming? Hutch asked. It's in the same block, I think. Hutch, Rosemary said, we've tried everywhere. There's nothing, absolutely nothing, except the new houses with neat square rooms that are all exactly alike and television cameras in the elevators. Is that so terrible? Hutch asked, smiling. Yes, Rosemary said, and Guy said, we were set to go into one, but we backed out to take this. Hutch looked at them for a moment, then sat back and struck the table with wide apart palms. Enough, he said. I shall mind my own business, as I ought to have done from the outset. Make fires in your working fireplace. I'll give you a bolt for the door and keep my mouth shut from this day forward. I'm an idiot. Forgive me. Rosemary smiled. The door already has a bolt, she said, and one of those chain things and a peephole. Well, mind you use all 3, Hutch said, and don't go wandering through the halls introducing yourself to all and sundry. You're not in Iowa. Omaha. The waiter brought their main courses. On the following Monday afternoon, Rosemary and Guy signed a 2-year lease on an apartment 7E at the Bramford. They gave Mrs. Cortez a cheque for $583, a month's rent in advance and a month's rent as security, and were told that if they wished, they could take occupancy of the apartment earlier than September 1st, as it would be cleared by the end of the week, and the painters could come in on Wednesday the 18th. Later on Monday, they received a telephone call from Martin Gardenia, the son of the apartment's previous tenant. They agreed to meet him at the apartment on Tuesday evening at 8, and, doing so, found him to be a tall man past 60 with a cheerful, open manner. He pointed out the things he wanted to sell and named his prices, all of which were attractively low. Rosemary and Guy conferred and examined and bought 2 air conditioners, a rosewood vanity with a petit-pont bench, the living room's Persian rug, and the Anderon's fire screen and tools. Mrs. Gardenia's rolled-up desk, disappointingly, was not for sale. While Guy wrote a cheque and helped tag the items to be left behind, Rosemary measured the living room and the bedroom with a 6-foot folding rule she had bought that morning. The previous March, Guy had played a role on Another World, a daytime television series. The character was back now for 3 days, so for the rest of the week, Guy was busy. Rosemary winnowed a folder of the decorating schemes she had collected since high school, found 2 that seemed appropriate to the apartment, and with those to guide her went looking at furnishings with Joan Jellicoe, one of the girls from Atlanta she had roomed with on coming to New York. Joan had the card of a decorator, which gave them entrance to wholesale houses and showrooms of every sort. Rosemary looked and made shorthand notes and drew sketches to bring to Guy, and hurried home, spilling over with fabric and wallpaper samples in time to catch him on Another World, and then ran out again and shopped for dinner. She skipped her sculpture class and cancelled, happily, a dental appointment. On Friday evening the apartment was theirs, an emptiness of high ceilings and unfamiliar dark into which they came with a lamp and a shopping bag, striking echoes from the farthest rooms. They turned on their air conditioners and admired their rug and their fireplace and Rosemary's vanity. Admired, too, their bathtub, doorknobs, hinges, moulding, floors, stove, refrigerator, bay windows, and view. They picnicked on the rug on tuna sandwiches and beer, and made floor plans of all 4 rooms, Guy measuring and Rosemary drawing. On the rug again, they unplugged the lamp and stripped and made love in the night glow of shadeless windows. "Shh!" Guy hissed afterwards, wide-eyed with fear. I hear the Trench sisters chewing." Rosemary hit him on the head hard. They bought a sofa and a king-size bed, a table for the kitchen, and 2 bentwood chairs. They called Con Ed and the phone company and stores and workmen and the padded wagon. The painters came on Wednesday the 18th, patched, spackled, primed, painted, and were gone on Friday the 20th, leaving colours very much like Rosemary's samples. A solitary paperhanger came in and grumbled and papered the bedroom. They called stores and workmen and Guy's mother in Montreal. They bought an armoire and a dining table and hi-fi components and new dishwashers and silverware. They were flush. In 1964, Guy had done a series of Anacin commercials that, shown time and time again, had earned him $18,000 and was still producing a sizable income. They hung window shades and papered shelves, watched carpet go down in the bedroom and white vinyl in the hallway. They got a plug-in phone with 3 jacks, paid bills and left a forwarding notice at the post office. On Friday, 27th of August, they moved. Joan and Dick Jellicoe sent a large potted plant and Guy's agent a small one. Hutch sent a telegram. The Branford will change from a bad house to a good house when one of its doors is marked R&G Woodhouse.